Heavy boots. Heavier boots. 12 weekends later was the first performance of Hamlet, although it was actually an abbreviated modern version because the real Hamlet is too long and confusing, and most of the kids in my class have ADD. For example, the famous To Be or Not to Be speech, which I know about from the collected Shakespeare set Grandma bought me, was cut down so that it was just to be or not to be. That's the question. Everyone had to have a part, but there weren't enough real parts, and I didn't go to the auditions because my boots were too heavy to go to school that day, so I got the part of Yorick. At first, that made me self-conscious. I suggested to Mrs. Wrigley that maybe I could just play tambourine in the orchestra or something. She said, "There is no orchestra." I said, "Still." She told me, "It'll be terrific. You'll wear all black, and the makeup crew will paint your hands and neck black, and the costume crew will create some sort of a papier-mâché skull for you to wear over your head. It'll really give the illusion that you don't have a body." I thought about that for a minute, and then I told her my better idea. What I'll do is this. I'll invent an invisibility suit that has a camera on my back that takes video of everything behind me and plays it on a plasma screen that I'll wear on my front, which will cover everything except my face. It'll look like I'm not there at all. She said, "Nifty." I said, "But is Yorick even a part?" She whispered into my ear, "If anything, I'm afraid you'll steal the show." Then I was excited to be Yorick. Opening night was pretty great. We had a fog machine, so the cemetery was just like a cemetery in a movie. "Alas, poor Yorick," Jimmy Snyder said, holding my face. "I knew him, Horatio." I didn't have a plasma screen because the costumes budget wasn't big enough, but from underneath the skull I could look around without anyone noticing. I saw lots of people I knew, which made me feel special. Mom and Ron and Grandma were there, obviously. Toothpaste was there with Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton, which is nice, and Mr. and Mrs. Minch were there too, because the Minch was Guildenstern. A lot of the blacks that I had met in those 12 weekends were there. Abe was there. Ada and Agnes were there. They were actually sitting next to each other, although they didn't realize it. I saw Albert and Alice and Alan and Arnold and Barbara and Barry. They must have been half the audience. But what was weird was that they didn't know what they had in common, which was kind of like how I didn't know what the thumbtack, the bent spoon, the square of aluminum foil, and all those other things I dug up in Central Park had to do with each other. I was incredibly nervous, but I maintained my confidence, and I was extremely subtle. I know, because there was a standing ovation, which made me feel like $100. The second performance was also pretty great. Mom was there, but Ron had to work late. That was okay, though, because I didn't want him there anyway. Grandma was there, obviously. I didn't see any of the blacks, but I knew that most people go to only one show unless they're your parents, so I didn't feel too bad about that. I tried to give an extra special performance, and I think I did. Alas, poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio, a really funny and excellent guy. I used to ride on his back all the time, and now it's so awful to think about. Only Grandma came the next night. Mom had a late meeting because one of her cases was about to go to trial, and I didn't ask where Ron was because I was embarrassed, and I didn't want him there anyway. As I was standing as still as I could, with Jimmy Snyder's hand under my chin, I wondered, what's the point of giving an extremely subtle performance if basically no one is watching? Grandma didn't come backstage to say hi before the performance the next night, or bye after, but I saw that she was there. Through the eye sockets, I could see her standing in the back of the gym, underneath the basketball hoop. Her makeup was absorbing the lighting in a fascinating way, which made her look almost ultraviolet. Alas, poor Yorick. I was still as I could be, and the whole time I was thinking, what trial is more important than the greatest play in history? The next performance was only Grandma again. She cried at all the wrong times and cracked up at all the wrong times. She applauded when the audience found out the news that Ophelia drowned, which is supposed to be bad news, and she booed when Hamlet scored his first point in the duel against Laertes at the end, which is good for obvious reasons. This is where his lips were that I used to kiss a lot. Where are your jokes now, your games, your songs? Backstage, before closing night, Jimmy Snyder imitated Grandma to the rest of the cast and crew. I guess I hadn't realized how loud she was. I had gotten so angry at myself for noticing her, but I was wrong. It was her fault. Everyone noticed. Jimmy did her exactly right. The way she swatted her left hand at something funny, like there was a fly in front of her face. The way she tilted her head like she was concentrating incredibly hard on something. And how she sneezed and told herself, "God bless me." And how she cried and said, "That's sad," so everyone could hear it. I sat there while he made all the kids crack up. Even Mrs. Wrigley cracked up, and so did her husband, who played the piano during the set changes. I didn't mention that she was my grandma, and I didn't tell him to stop. Outside, I was cracking up too. Inside, I was wishing that she were tucked away in a portable pocket, or that she'd also had an invisibility suit. I wish the two of us could go somewhere far away, like the 6th borough. She was there again that night in the back row, although only the first 3 rows were taken. I watched her from under the skull. She had her hand pressed against her ultraviolet heart, and I could hear her saying, "That's sad. That's so sad." I thought about the unfinished scarf and the rock she carried across Broadway, and how she had lived so much life but still needed imaginary friends, and the 1,000 thumb wars. Maggie Carson. "Hey, Hamlet, where's Polonius?" Jimmy Snyder. "At supper." Maggie Carson. "At supper? Where?" Jimmy Snyder. "Not where he eats, but where he's eaten." Maggie Carson. "Wow." Jimmy Snyder. "A king can end up going through the guts of a beggar." I felt, that night, on that stage, under that skull, incredibly close to everything in the universe, but also extremely alone. I wondered, for the first time in my life, if life was worth all the work it took to live. What exactly made it worth it? What's so horrible about being dead forever and not feeling anything and not even dreaming? What's so great about feeling and dreaming? Jimmy put his hand under my face. This is where his lips were that I used to kiss a lot. Where are your jokes now, your games, your songs? Maybe it was because of everything that had happened in those 12 weeks, or maybe it was because I felt so close and alone that night. I just couldn't be dead any longer. Me. Alas, poor Hamlet. I take Jimmy Snyder's face into my hand. I knew him, Horatio. Jimmy Snyder. But you're only a skull. Me. So what? I don't care. Screw you. Jimmy Snyder whispers. This is not in the play. He looks for help from Mrs. Wrigley, who is in the front row, flipping through the script. She draws circles in the air with her right hand, which is the universal sign for improvise. Me. I knew him, Horatio. A jerk of infinite stupidity. A most excellent masturbator in the 2nd floor boys' bathroom. I have proof. Also, he's dyslexic. Jimmy Snyder. Can't think of anything to say. Me. Where be your jibes now, your gambols, your songs? Jimmy Snyder. What are you talking about? Me. Raise his hand to scoreboard. Succotash, my cocker spaniel, you fudging crevasse-hole dipshitaki. Jimmy Snyder. Huh? Me. You are guilty of having abused those less strong than you, of making the lives of nerds like me and Toothpaste and the Minch almost impossible, of imitating mental retards, of prank calling people who get almost no phone calls anyway, of terrorizing domesticated animals and old people, who, by the way, are smarter and more knowledgeable than you, of making fun of me just because I have a pussy. And I've seen you litter, too. Jimmy Snyder. I never prank called any retards. Me. You were adopted. Jimmy Snyder searches audience for his parents. Me. And nobody loves you. Jimmy Snyder, his eyes fill with tears. Me. And you have amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Jimmy Snyder. Huh? Me. On behalf of the dead, I pull the skull off my head. Even though it's made of paper mache, it's really hard. I smash it against Jimmy Snyder's head, and I smash it again. He falls to the ground because he is unconscious, and I can't believe how strong I actually am. I smash his head again with all my force, and blood starts to come out of his nose and ears, but I still don't feel any sympathy for him. I want him to bleed because he deserves it, and nothing else makes any sense. Dad didn't make sense. Mom doesn't make sense. The audience doesn't make sense. The folding chairs and fog machine don't make sense. Shakespeare doesn't make sense. The stars that I know are on the other side of the gym ceiling don't make sense. The only thing that makes any sense right now is my smashing Jimmy Snyder's face, his blood. I knock a bunch of his teeth into his mouth, and I think they go down his throat. There is blood everywhere, covering everything. I keep smashing the skull against his skull, which is also Ron's skull for letting Mom get on with life, and Mom's skull for getting on with life, and Dad's skull for dying, and Grandma's skull for embarrassing me so much, and Dr. Fiend's skull for asking if any good could come out of Dad's death, and the skulls of everyone else I know. The audience is applauding, all of them, because I am making so much sense. They are giving me a standing ovation as I hit him again and again. I hear them call, the audience, thank you, Oscar. We love you so much. We'll protect you." It would have been great. I looked out across the audience from underneath the skull with Jimmy's hand under my chin. Alas, poor Yorick. I saw Abe Black, and he saw me. I knew that we were sharing something with our eyes, but I didn't know what, and I didn't know if it mattered. It was 12 weekends earlier that I'd gone to visit Abe Black in Coney Island. I'm very idealistic, but I knew I couldn't walk that far, so I took a cab. Even before we were out of Manhattan, I realized that the $7.68 in my wallet wasn't going to be enough. I don't know if you'd count it as a lie or not that I didn't say anything. It's just that I knew I had to get there, and there was no alternative. When the cab driver pulled over in front of the building, the meter said $76.50. I said, "Mr. Malhotra, are you an optimist or a pessimist?" He said, "What?" I said, "Because unfortunately I only have $7.68. $7.68. This is not happening." "Unfortunately it is, but if you give me your address, I promise I'll send you the rest." He put his head down on the steering wheel. I asked if he was okay. He said, "Keep your $7.68. I said, "I promise I'll send you the money. I promise." He handed me his card, which was actually the card of a dentist, but he had written his address on the other side. Then he said something in some other language that wasn't French. "Are you mad at me?" Obviously, I'm incredibly panicky about roller coasters, but Abe convinced me to ride one with him. "It would be a shame to die without riding the Cyclone," he told me. "It would be a shame to die," I told him. "Yeah," he said, "but with the Cyclone you can choose." We sat in the front car, and Abe lifted his hands in the air on the downhill parts. I kept wondering if what I was feeling was at all like falling. In my head, I tried to calculate all of the forces that kept the car on the tracks and me in the car. There was gravity, obviously, and centrifugal force, and momentum, and the friction between the wheels and the tracks, and wind resistance, I think, or something. Dad used to teach me physics with crayons on paper tablecloths while we waited for our pancakes. He would have been able to explain everything. The ocean smelled weird, and so did the food they were selling on the boardwalk, like funnel cakes and cotton candy and hot dogs. It was an almost perfect day, except that Abe didn't know anything about the key or about Dad. He said he was driving into Manhattan and could give me a ride if I wanted one. I told him, "I don't get in cars with strangers, and how did you know I was going to Manhattan?" He said, "We're not strangers, and I don't know how I knew." "Do you have an SUV?" "No." "Good. Do you have a gas-electric hybrid car?" "No." "Bad." While we were in the car, I told him all about how I was going to meet everyone in New York with the last name Black. He said, "I can relate in my own way, because I had a dog run away once. She was the best dog in the world. I couldn't have loved her more or treated her better. She didn't want to run away. She got confused and followed one thing and then another. But my dad didn't run away, I said. He was killed in a terrorist attack. Abe said, I was thinking of you. He went up with me to the door of Ada Black's apartment, even though I told him I could do it myself. I'll feel better knowing you made it here safely, he said, which sounded like Mom. Ada Black owned 2 Picasso paintings. She didn't know anything about the key, so the paintings meant nothing to me, even if I knew they were famous. She said I could have a seat on the couch if I wanted to, but I told her I didn't believe in leather, so I stood. Her apartment was the most amazing apartment I'd ever been in. The floors were like marble chessboards, and the ceilings were like cakes. Everything seemed like it belonged in a museum, so I took some pictures with Grandpa's camera. This might be a rude question, but are you the richest person in the world? She touched a lampshade and said, I'm the 467th richest person in the world. I asked her how it made her feel to know that there were homeless people and millionaires living in the same city. She said, I give a lot to charity, if that's what you're getting at. I told her that I wasn't getting at anything, and that I just wanted to know how she felt. I feel fine, she said, and she asked me if I wanted something to drink. I asked her for a coffee, and she asked someone in another room for a coffee, and then I asked her if she thought that maybe no one should have more than a certain amount of money until everyone had that amount of money. That was an idea Dad had once suggested to me. She said, the Upper West Side isn't free, you know. I asked her how she knew that I lived on the Upper West Side. Do you have things you don't need? Not really. You collect coins. How did you know I collect coins? Lots of young people collect coins. I told her, I need them. Do you need them as much as a homeless person needs food? The conversation was beginning to make me feel self-conscious. She said, do you have more things that you need or more things that you don't need? I said, it depends on what it means to need. She said, believe it or not, I used to be idealistic. I asked her what idealistic meant. It means you live by what you think is right. You don't do that anymore? There are questions I don't ask anymore. An African-American woman brought me coffee on a silver tray. I told her, your uniform is incredibly beautiful. She looked at Ada. Really, I said, I think light blue is a very, very beautiful color on you. She was still looking at Ada, who said, thanks, Gail. As she walked back to the kitchen, I told her, Gail is a beautiful name. When it was just the 2 of us again, Ada told me, Oscar, I think you made Gail feel quite uncomfortable. What do you mean? I could tell that she felt embarrassed. I was just trying to be nice. You might have tried too hard. How can you try too hard to be nice? You were being condescending. What's that? You were talking to her like she was a child. No, I wasn't. There's no shame in being a maid. She does a serious job and I pay her well. I said, I was just trying to be nice. And then I wondered, did I tell her my name was Oscar? We sat there for a while. She stared out the window like she was waiting for something to happen in Central Park. I asked, would it be okay if I snooped around your apartment? She laughed and said, finally, someone says what he's thinking. I looked around a bit, and there were so many rooms that I wondered if the apartment's inside was bigger than its outside, but I didn't find any clues. When I came back, she asked if I wanted a finger sandwich, which freaked me out, but I was very polite and just said, Jose. Pardon? Jose. I'm sorry, I don't understand what that means. Jose, as in, no way. She said, I know what I am. I nodded my head, even though I didn't know what she was talking about or what it had to do with anything. Even if I don't like what I am, I know what I am. My children like what they are, but they don't know what they are. So tell me which is worse. What are the options again? She cracked up and said, I like you. I showed her the key, but she had never seen it and couldn't tell me anything about it. Even though I told her I didn't need any help, she made the doorman promise to put me in a cab. I told her I couldn't afford a cab. She said, I can. I gave her my card. She said, good luck. and put her hands on my cheeks and kissed the top of my head. That was Saturday, and it was depressing. Dear Oscar Schell, thank you for your contribution to the American Diabetes Foundation. Every dollar, or in your case, 50 cents, counts. I have enclosed some additional literature about the foundation, including our mission statement, a brochure featuring past activities and successes, as well as some information about our future goals, both short and long term. Thank you once more for contributing to this urgent cause. You are saving lives. With gratitude, Patricia Roxbury, President, New York Chapter. This might be hard to believe, but the next Black lived in our building, just one floor above us. If it weren't my life, I wouldn't have believed it. I went to the lobby and asked Stan what he knew about the person who lived in 6A. He said, "Never seen anyone go in or come out, just a lot of deliveries and a lot of trash." Cool. He leaned down and whispered, "Haunted." I whispered back, "I don't believe in the paranormal." He said, "Ghosts don't care if you believe in them." And even though I was an atheist, I knew he wasn't right. I walked back up the steps, this time past our floor and to the 6th. There was a mat in front of the door which said welcome in 12 different languages. That didn't seem like something a ghost would put in front of his apartment. I tried the key in the lock, but it didn't work. So I rang the buzzer, which was exactly where our buzzer was. I heard some noise inside, and maybe even some creepy music, but I was brave and just stood there. After an incredibly long time, the door opened. "Can I help you?" an old man asked, but he asked it extremely loudly, so it was more like a scream. "Yes, hello," I said. "I live downstairs in 5A. May I please ask you a few questions?" "Hello, young man," he said. And he was kind of weird looking because he had on a red beret like a French person and an eye patch like a pirate. He said, "I'm Mr. Black." I said, "I know." He turned around and started walking into his apartment. I guessed I was supposed to follow him, so I did. Another thing that was weird was that his apartment looked exactly like our apartment. The floors were the same, the windowsills were the same, even the tiles on the fireplace were the same color green. But his apartment was also incredibly different because it was filled with different stuff. Tons of stuff everywhere. Also, there was a huge column right in the middle of the dining room. It was as big as 2 refrigerators, and it made it impossible for the room to have a table or anything else in it, like ours did. "What's that for?" I asked, but he didn't hear me. There were a bunch of dolls and other things on the mantel, and the floors were filled with little rugs. "I got those in Iceland," he said, pointing at the seashells on the windowsill. He pointed at a sword on the wall and said, "I got that in Japan." I asked him if it was a samurai sword. He said, "It's a replica." I said, "Cool." He led me to the kitchen table, which was where our kitchen table was, and he sat down and slapped his hand against his knee. "Well," he said, so loudly that I wanted to cover my ears, "I've had a pretty amazing life." I thought it was weird that he said that, because I didn't ask him about his life. I didn't even tell him why I was there. "I was born on January 1, 1900. I lived every day of the 20th century. "Really?" "My mother altered my birth certificate so I could fight in the First World War. That was the only lie she ever told. I was engaged to Fitzgerald's sister." "Who's Fitzgerald?" "Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald, my boy. A great author. A great author." Oops. I used to sit on her porch and talk to her father while she powdered her nose upstairs. Her father and I had the most lively conversations. He was a great man, like Winston Churchill was a great man. I decided that it would be better to Google Winston Churchill when I got home instead of mentioning that I didn't know who he was. One day she came downstairs and was ready to go. I told her to hold on for a minute because her father and I were right smack in the middle of a terrific conversation, and you can't interrupt a terrific conversation, right? I don't know. Later that night, as I was dropping her off on that same porch, she said, "Sometimes I wonder if you like my father more than me." I inherited that damn honesty from my mother, and it caught up with me again. I told her, "I do." Well, that's the last time I told her I do, if you know what I mean. I don't. I blew it. Boy, did I blow it. He started cracking up extremely loudly, and he slapped his knee. I said, "That's hilarious," because it must have been for him to crack up so much. "Hilarious," he said. "It is. I never heard from her again. Oh well. So many people enter and leave your life. Hundreds of thousands of people. You have to keep the door open so they can come in, but it also means you have to let them go." He put a tea kettle on the stove. "You're wise," I told him. "I've had enough time to get wise. See this?" he hollered, and he flipped up his eye patch. "That's from Nazi shrapnel. I was a war correspondent and ended up attaching myself to a British tank corps going up the Rhine. We were ambushed one afternoon, toward the end of '44. I bled my eye all over the page I was writing on, but those sons of bitches couldn't stop me. I finished my sentence." "What was the sentence?" "Ah, who can remember? The point is, I wasn't going to let those bastard krauts stop my pen. It's mightier than the sword, you know, and the MG-34. "Could you please put the patch back?" "See that?" he said, pointing at the kitchen floor, but I couldn't stop thinking about his eye. "There's oak under those rugs. Quarter sawn oak. I should know. I laid it myself." "Jose," I said, and I wasn't just saying it to be nice. I was keeping a list in my head of things I could do to be more like him. "My wife and I renovated this kitchen ourselves with these hands." He showed me his hands. They look like the hands on the skeleton in the Rayner's scientific catalog that Ron offered to buy for me, except they had skin, blotchy skin, and I didn't want gifts from Ron. "Where's your wife now?" The tea kettle started to whistle. "Oh," he said, "she died 24 years ago. Long time ago. Yesterday in my life." "Oops." "It's okay." "You don't feel bad that I asked about her? You can tell me if you do." "No," he said. "Thinking about her is the next best thing." He poured 2 cups of tea. "Do you have any coffee?" I asked. "Coffee?" "It stunts my growth, and I'm afraid of death." He slapped the table and said, "My boy, I have some coffee from Honduras that's got your name on it." "But you don't even know my name." We sat around for a while, and he told me more about his amazing life. As far as he knew, which seemed pretty far, he was the only person still alive who had fought in both of the world wars. He'd been to Australia and Kenya and Pakistan and Panama. I asked him, "If you had to guess, how many countries would you guess you've been to?" He said, "I wouldn't have to guess. 112. "Are there even that many countries?" He told me, "There are more places you haven't heard of than you've heard of." I loved that. He had reported almost every war of the 20th century, like the Spanish Civil War and the genocide in East Timor, and bad stuff that happened in Africa. I hadn't heard of any of them, so I tried to remember them so I could Google them when I got home. The list in my head was getting incredibly long. Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald, powdering her nose, Churchill, Mustang convertible, Walter Cronkite, Necking, the Bay of Pigs, LP, Datsun, Kent State, Lard, Anatola Khomeini, Polaroid, Apartheid, Drive-In, Favela, Trotsky, the Berlin Wall, Tito, Gone with the Wind, Frank Lloyd Wright, Hula Hoop, Technicolor, the Spanish Civil War, Grace Kelly, East Timor, Slide Rule, a bunch of places in Africa whose names I tried to remember but had already forgotten. It was getting hard to keep all the things I didn't know inside me. His apartment was filled with the stuff he'd collected during the wars of his life, and I took pictures of them with Grandpa's camera. There were books in foreign languages, and little statues, and scrolls with pretty paintings, and Coke cans from around the world, and a bunch of rocks on his fireplace mantel, although all of them were common. One fascinating thing was that each rock had a little piece of paper next to it that said where the rock came from, and when it came from, like Normandy, 6/1944, Huachon Dam, 4/9/51, and Dallas, 11/22/63. That was so fascinating. But one weird thing was that there were lots of bullets on the mantle too, and they didn't have little pieces of paper next to them. I asked him how he knew which was which. "A bullet's a bullet's a bullet," he said. "But isn't a rock, I asked? He said, "Of course not." I thought I understood him, but I wasn't positive, so I pointed at the roses in the vase on the table. Is a rose a rose? No, a rose is not a rose is not a rose. And then for some reason I started thinking about something in the way she moves. So I asked, is a love song a love song? He said, yes. I thought for a second, is love love? He said, no. He had a wall of masks from every country he'd been to, like Armenia and Chile and Ethiopia. It's not a horrible world, he told me, putting a Cambodian mask on his face, but it's filled with a lot of horrible people. I had another cup of coffee, and then I knew it was time to get to the point, so I took the key off my neck and gave it to him. Do you know what this opens? Don't think so, he hollered. Maybe you knew my dad. Who was your dad? His name was Thomas Shell. He lived in 5A until he died. No, he said, that name doesn't ring a bell. I asked if he was 100% sure. He said, I've lived long enough to know I'm not 100% anything. And he got up, walked past the column in the dining room, and went over to the coat closet, which was tucked under the stairs. That was when I had the revelation that his apartment wasn't just like ours, because his had an upstairs. He opened the closet, and there was a library card catalog inside. Cool, he said. This is my biographical index. Your what? I started it when I was just beginning to write. I'd create a card for everyone I thought I might need to reference one day. There's a card for everyone I ever wrote about, and cards for people I talked to in the course of writing my pieces, and cards for people I read books about, and cards for people in the footnotes of those books. In the mornings, when I'd read the papers, I would make cards for everyone that seemed biographically significant. I still do it. Why don't you just use the internet? I don't have a computer. That made me start to feel dizzy. How many cards do you have? I've never counted. There must be tens of thousands by this point, maybe hundreds of thousands. What do you write on them? I write the name of the person and a one-word biography. Just one word? Everyone gets boiled down to one word. And that's helpful? It's hugely helpful. I read an article about Latin American currencies this morning. It referred to the work of someone named Manuel Escobar. So I came and I looked up Escobar. Sure enough, he was in there. Manuel Escobar, unionist. But he's also probably a husband or dad or Beatles fan or jogger or who knows what else. Sure, you could write a book about Manuel Escobar. And that would leave things out too. You could write 10 books. You could never stop writing. He slid out drawers from the cabinet and pulled cards from the drawers, one after another. Henry Kissinger, war. Henriette Coleman, music. Che Guevara, war. Jeff Bezos, money. Philip Guston, art. Mahatma Gandhi, war. But he was a pacifist, I said. Right, war. Arthur Ashe, tennis. Tom Cruise, money. Elie Wiesel, war. Arnold Schwarzenegger, war. Martha Stewart, money. Rem Koolhaas, architecture. Ariel Sharon, war. Mick Jagger, money. Yasser Arafat, war. Susan Sontag, thought. Wolfgang Puck, money. Pope John Paul II, war. I asked if he had a card for Stephen Hawking. Of course, he said, and slid out a drawer and pulled out a card. Stephen Hawking, astrophysics. Do you have a card for yourself? He slid out a drawer. A.R. Black, war, crossed out, husband. Do you have a card for my dad? Thomas Shell, right? Right. He went to the S drawer and pulled it halfway out. His fingers ran through the cards like the fingers of someone much younger than 103. Nothing, sorry. Could you double check? His fingers ran through the cards again. He shook his head. Sorry. Well, what if a card is filed in the wrong place? Then we've got a problem. Could it be? It happens occasionally. Marilyn Monroe was lost in the index for more than a decade. I kept checking under Norma Jean Baker, thinking I was smart, but completely forgetting that she was born Norma Jean Mortensen. Who's Norma Jean Mortensen? Marilyn Monroe. Who's Marilyn Monroe? Sex. Do you have a card for Mohammed Atta? Atta, that one rings a bell. Let me see. He opened the A drawer. I told him, Mohammed is the most common name on earth. He pulled out a card and said, Bingo! Muhammad Atta. War. I sat down on the floor. He asked what was wrong. It's just that why would you have one for him and not for my dad? What do you mean? It isn't fair. What isn't fair? My dad was good. Muhammad Atta was evil. So my dad deserves to be in there. What makes you think it's good to be in there? Because it means you're biographically significant. And why is that good? I want to be significant. 9 out of 10 significant people have to do with money or war. But still, it gave me heavy, heavy boots. Dad wasn't a great man, not like Winston Churchill, whoever he was. Dad was just someone who ran a family jewelry business. Just an ordinary dad. But I wished so much then that he had been great. I wished he'd been famous like a movie star, which is what he deserved. I wished Mr. Black had written about him and risked his life to tell the world about him and had reminders of him around his apartment. I started thinking, if Dad were boiled down to just one word, what would that be? Jeweler? Atheist? Is copywriter one word? You're looking for something, Mr. Black asked. This key used to belong to my dad, I said, pulling it out from under my shirt again, and I want to know what it opens. He shrugged his shoulders and hollered, I'd want to know too. Then we were silent for a while. I thought I was going to cry, but I didn't want to cry in front of him, so I asked where the bathroom was. He pointed to the top of the stairs. As I walked up, I held the railing tight and started inventing things in my head. Airbags for skyscrapers, solar-powered limousines that never have to stop moving, a frictionless perpetual yo-yo. The bathroom smelled like an old person, and some of the tiles that were supposed to be on the wall were on the floor. There was a photograph of a woman tucked in the corner of the mirror above the sink. She was sitting at the kitchen table that we were just sitting at, and she was wearing an enormous hat, even though she was inside, obviously. That's how I knew that she was special. One of her hands was on a teacup. Her smile was incredibly beautiful. I wondered if her palm was sweating condensation when the picture was taken. I wonder if Mr. Black took the picture. Before I went back down, I snooped around a little bit. I was impressed by how much life Mr. Black had lived and how much he wanted to have his life around him. I tried the key in all of the doors, even though he said he didn't recognize it. It's not that I didn't trust him, because I did. It's that at the end of my search, I wanted to be able to say, I don't know how I could have tried harder. One door was to a closet, which didn't have anything really interesting in it, just a bunch of coats. Behind another door was a room filled with boxes. I took the lids off a couple of them, and they were filled with newspapers. The newspapers in some of the boxes were yellow, and some were almost like leaves. I looked in another room, which must have been his bedroom. There was the most amazing bed I've ever seen, because it was made out of tree parts. The legs were stumps, the ends were logs, and there was a ceiling of branches. Also, there were all sorts of fascinating metal things glued to it, like coins, pins, and a button that said Roosevelt. That used to be a tree in the park, Mr. Black said from behind me, which scared me so much that my hands started shaking. I asked, Are you mad at me for snooping? But he must not have heard me, because he kept talking. By the reservoir. She tripped on its roots once. That was back when I was courting her. She fell down and cut her hand. A little cut, but I never forgot it. That was so long ago. But yesterday in your life, right? Yesterday, today, 5 minutes ago, now. He aimed his eyes at the ground. She always begged me to give the reporting a break. She wanted me at home. He shook his head and said, But there were things I needed too. He looked at the floor, then back at me. I asked, So what did you do? For most of our marriage, I treated her as though she didn't matter. I came home only between wars and left her alone for months at a time. There was always war." "Did you know that in the last 3,500 years there have been only 230 years of peace throughout the civilized world?" He said, "You tell me which 230 years and I'll believe you." "I don't know which, but I know it's true." "And where's this civilized world you're referring to?" I asked him what happened to make him stop reporting war. He said, "I realized that what I wanted was to stay in one place with one person." "So you came home for good?" "I chose her over war. And the first thing I did when I came back, even before I went home, was to go to the park and cut down that tree. It was the middle of the night. I thought someone would try to stop me, but no one did. I brought the pieces home with me. I made that tree into this bed. It was the bed we shared for the last years we had together. I wish I'd understood myself better earlier." I asked, "Which was your last war?" He said, "Cutting down that tree was my last war." I asked him who won, which I thought was a nice question because it would let him say that he won and feel proud. He said, "The axe won. It's always that way." He went up to the bed and put his finger on the head of a nail. "See these?" I try to be a perceptive person who follows the scientific method and is observant, but I hadn't noticed before that the whole bed was completely covered in nails. "I've hammered a nail into the bed every morning since she died. It's the first thing I do after waking. 8,629 nails." I asked him why, which I thought was another nice question, because it would let him tell me how much he loved her. He said, "I don't know." I said, "But if you don't know, then why do you do it?" "I suppose it helps, keeps me going. I know it's nonsense." "I don't think it's nonsense." "Nails aren't light. One is, a handful are, but they add up." I told him, "The average human body contains enough iron to make a 1-inch nail." He said, "The bed got heavy. I could hear the floor straining like it was in pain. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night afraid that everything would go crashing to the apartment below." "You couldn't sleep because of me." "So I built that column downstairs." "Do you know about the library at Indiana University?" "No," I said, but I was still thinking about the column. "It's sinking a little more than an inch a year because when they built it, they didn't take into account the weight of all the books. I wrote a piece about it. I didn't make the connection then, but now I'm thinking of Debussy's Sunken Cathedral, one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever written. I haven't heard it in years and years. Do you want to feel something?" "Okay," I said, because even though I didn't know him, I felt like I knew him. "Open your hand," he said. So I did. He reached in his pocket and took out a paper clip. He pressed it into my hand and said, "Make a fist around it." So I did. "Now extend your hand." I extended my hand. "Now open your hand." The paper clip flew to the bed. It was only then that I observed that the key was reaching toward the bed. Because it was relatively heavy, the effect was small. The string pulled incredibly gently at the back of my neck, while the key floated just a tiny bit off my chest. I thought about all the metal buried in Central Park. Was it being pulled, even if just a little, to the bed? Mr. Black closed his hand around the floating key and said, "I haven't left the apartment in 24 years. "What do you mean?" "Sadly, my boy, I mean exactly what I said. I haven't left the apartment in 24 years. My feet haven't touched the ground." "Why not?" "There hasn't been any reason to." "What about stuff you need?" "What does someone like me need that he can still get?" "Food? Books? Stuff?" "I call in an order for food and they bring it to me. I call the bookstore for books, the video store for movies, pens, stationery, cleaning supplies, medicine. I even order my clothes over the phone. See this?" he said, and he showed me his muscle, which went down instead of up. "I was flyweight champion for 9 days. I asked, "Which 9 days?" He said, "Don't you believe me?" I said, "Of course I do." "The world is such a big place," he said, "but so is the inside of an apartment. So is this," he said, pointing at his head. But you used to travel so much. You had so many experiences. Don't you miss the world? I do, very much. My boots were so heavy that I was glad there was a column underneath us. How could such a lovely person have been lonely person have been living so close to me my whole life? If I had known, I would have gone up to keep him company, or I would have made some jewelry for him, or told him hilarious jokes, or given him a private tambourine concert. It made me start to wonder if there were other people so lonely so close. I thought about Eleanor Rigby. It's true. Where do they all come from? And where do they all belong? What if the water that came out of the shower was treated with a chemical that responded to a combination of things, like your heartbeat and your body temperature and your brain waves, so that your skin changed color according to your mood? If you were extremely excited, your skin would turn green. And if you were angry, you'd turn red, obviously. And if you felt like shiitake, you'd turn brown. And if you were blue, you'd turn blue. Everyone could know what everyone else felt, and we could be more careful with each other. Because you'd never want to tell a person whose skin was purple that you were angry at her for being late, just like you would want to pat a pink person on the back and tell him, "Congratulations." Another reason it would be a good invention is that there are so many times when you know you're feeling a lot of something, but you don't know what the something is. Am I frustrated? Am I actually just panicky? And that confusion changes your mood. It becomes your mood, and you become a confused, gray person. But with the special water, you could look at your orange hands and think, "I'm happy. That whole time I was actually happy. What a relief." Mr. Black said, "I went to report on a village in Russia, a community of artists who were forced to flee the cities. I'd heard that paintings hung everywhere. I heard you couldn't see the walls through all of the paintings. They'd painted the ceilings, the plates, the windows, the lampshades. Was it an act of rebellion? An act of expression? Were the paintings good, or was that beside the point? I needed to see it for myself, and I needed to tell the world about it. I used to live for reporting like that. Stalin found out about the community and sent his thugs in, just a few days before I got there, to break all of their arms. That was worse than killing them. It was a horrible sight, Oscar. Their arms in crude splints, straight in front of them like zombies. They couldn't feed themselves because they couldn't get their hands to their mouths. So you know what they did? They starved. They fed each other. That's the difference between heaven and hell. In hell we starve. In heaven we feed each other. I don't believe in the afterlife. Neither do I, but I believe in the story." And then, all of a sudden, I thought of something enormous, something wonderful. "Do you want to help me?" "Excuse me?" "With the key." "Help you?" "You could go around with me." "You want my help?" "Yes." "Well, I don't need anyone's charity." "Jose," I told him, "you're obviously very smart and knowledgeable, and you know a ton of things that I don't know. And also it's good just to have company, so please say yes." He closed his eyes and became quiet. I couldn't tell if he was thinking about what we were talking about, or thinking about something else, or if maybe he'd fallen asleep, which I know that old people, like Grandma, sometimes do, because they can't help it. "You don't have to make a decision right now," I said, because I didn't want him to feel forced. I told him about the 162 million locks, and how the search would probably take a long time. It might even take the full 1.5 years. So if he wanted to think about it for a while, that would be okay. He could just come downstairs and tell me his answer whenever. He kept thinking. "Take as long as you want," I said. He kept thinking. I asked him, "Do you have a decision?" He didn't say anything. "What do you think, Mr. Black?" Nothing. "Mr. Black?" I tapped him on the shoulder, and he looked up suddenly. "Hello?" He smiled, like I do when Mom finds out about something I did that I shouldn't have. "I've been reading your lips." "What?" He pointed at his hearing aids, which I hadn't noticed before, even though I was trying as hard as I could to notice everything. "I turned them off a long time ago." "You turned them off?" "A long, long time ago." "On purpose?" "I thought I'd save the batteries." "For what?" He shrugged his shoulders. "But don't you want to hear things?" He shrugged his shoulders again, in a way so I couldn't tell if he was saying yes or no. And then I thought of something else, something beautiful, something true. Do you want me to turn them on for you? He looked at me and through me at the same time, like I was a stained glass window. I asked again, moving my lips slowly and carefully so I could be sure he understood me. Do you want me to turn them on for you? He kept looking at me. I asked again. He said, I don't know how to say yes. I told him, you don't have to. I went behind him and saw a tiny dial on the back of each of his hearing aids. Do it slowly, he said, almost like he was begging me. It's been a long, long time. I went back around to his front so he could see my lips, and I promised him I would be as gentle as I could. Then I went back behind him and turned the dials extremely slowly, a few millimeters at a time. Nothing happened. I turned them a few more millimeters, and then just a few more. I went around to the front of him. He shrugged, and so did I. I went back around behind him and turned them up just a tiny bit more until they stopped. I went back in front of him. He shrugged. Maybe the hearing aids didn't work anymore, or maybe the batteries had died of old age, or maybe he'd gone completely deaf since he turned them off, which was possible. We looked at each other. Then, out of nowhere, a flock of birds flew by the window, extremely fast and incredibly close. Maybe 20 of them, maybe more, but they also seemed like just one bird, because somehow they all knew exactly what to do. Mr. Black grabbed at his ears and made a bunch of weird sounds. He started crying, not out of happiness, I could tell, but not out of sadness either. Are you okay? I whispered. The sound of my voice made him cry more, and he nodded his head, yes. I asked him if he wanted me to make some more noise. He nodded yes, which shook more tears down his cheeks. I went to the bed and rattled it so that a bunch of the pins and paper clips fell off. He cried more tears. Do you want me to turn them off? I asked, but he wasn't paying attention to me anymore. He was walking around the room, sticking his ears up to anything that made any noise, including very quiet things like pipes. I wanted to stay there watching him hear the world, but it was getting late, and I had a Hamlet rehearsal at 4:30, and it was an extremely important rehearsal because it was the first one with lighting effects. I told Mr. Black that I would pick him up the next Saturday at 7, and we would start then. I told him, I'm not even through with the A's. He said, okay, and the sound of his own voice made him cry the most. Message 3, 9:31 a.m. Hello? 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 When Mom tucked me in that night, she could tell that something was on my mind and asked if I wanted to talk. I did, but not to her, so I said, no offense, but no. Are you sure? Très fatigue, I said, waving my hand. Do you want me to read something to you? It's okay. We could go through the New York Times for mistakes. No, thank you. All right, she said, all right. She gave me a kiss and turned off the light, and then, as she was about to go, I said, Mom? And she said, yes. And I said, do you promise not to bury me when I die? She came back over and put her hand on my cheek and said, you are not going to die. I told her, I am. She said, you're not going to die any time soon. You have a long, long life ahead of you. I told her, as you know, I'm extremely brave, but I can't spend eternity in a small underground place. I just can't. Do you love me? Of course I love you. Then put me in one of those mausoleum thingies. A mausoleum, like I read about. Do we have to talk about this? Yes. Now? Yes. Why? Because what if I die tomorrow? You're not going to die tomorrow. Dad didn't think he was going to die the next day. That's not going to happen to you. It wasn't going to happen to him. Oscar, I'm sorry, but I just can't be buried. Don't you want to be with Dad and me? Dad isn't even there. Excuse me? His body was destroyed. Don't talk like that. Talk like what? It's the truth. I don't understand why everyone pretends he's there. Take it easy, Oscar. It's just an empty box. It's more than an empty box. Why would I want to spend eternity next to an empty box? Mom said, his spirit is there, and that made me really angry. I told her Dad didn't have a spirit. He had cells. His memory is there. His memory is here, I said, pointing at my head. Dad had a spirit, she said, like she was rewinding a bit in our conversation. I told her he had cells, and now they're on rooftops and in the river and in the lungs of millions of people around New York who breathe him every time they speak. You shouldn't say things like that. But it's the truth. Why can't I say the truth? You're getting out of control. Just because Dad died, it doesn't mean you can be illogical, Mom. Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. Get a hold of yourself, Oscar. Fuck you. Excuse me? Sorry, I mean, screw you. You need a timeout. I need a mausoleum. Oscar, don't lie to me. Who's lying? Where were you? Where was I when? That day. What day? The day. What do you mean? Where were you? I was at work. Why weren't you at home? Because I have to go to work. Why didn't you pick me up from school like the other moms? Oscar, I came home as soon as I could. It takes longer for me to get home than for you to. I thought it would be better to meet you at the apartment than make you wait at school for me to get to you. But you should have been home when I got home. I wished I had been, but it wasn't possible. You should have made it possible. I can't make the impossible possible. You should have, she said. I got home as quickly as I could. And then she started crying. The axe was winning. I put my cheek against her. I don't need anything fancy, Mom, just something above ground. She took a deep breath, put her arm around me, and said, that might be possible. I tried to think of some way to be hilarious, because I thought that maybe if I was hilarious, she wouldn't be mad at me anymore and I could feel safe again. With a little elbow room? What? I'm going to need a little elbow room. She smiled and said, okay. I sniffled again because I could tell that it was working. And a bidet. Absolutely. One bidet coming up. And some electrical fencing. Electrical fencing? So that grave robbers won't try to steal all of my jewels. Jewels? Yeah, I said. I'm going to need some jewels, too. We cracked up together, which was necessary, because she loved me again. I pulled my feelings book from under my pillow, flipped to the current page, and downgraded from desperate to mediocre. Hey, that's great, Mom said, looking over my shoulder. No, I said, it's mediocre, and please don't snoop. She rubbed my chest, which was nice, although I had to turn a little so she wouldn't feel that I still had my key on and that there were 2 keys. Mom? Yes? Nothing. What is it, baby? Well, it's just that wouldn't it be great if mattresses had spaces for your arm so that when you rolled onto your side you could fit just right? That would be nice. And good for your back, probably because it would let your spine be straight, which I know is important. That is important. Also, it would make snuggling easier. You know how that arm constantly gets in the way? I do. And making snuggling easier is important. Very. Mediocre. Crossed out. Optimistic, but realistic. I miss Dad. So do I. Do you? Of course I do. But do you really? How could you ask that? It's just that you don't act like you miss him very much. What are you talking about? I think you know what I'm talking about. I don't. I hear you laughing. You hear me laughing? In the living room with Ron. You think because I laugh every now and then that I don't miss Dad? I rolled onto my side, away from her. Optimistic but realistic. Crossed out. Extremely depressed. She said, I cry a lot too, you know. I don't see you cry a lot. Maybe that's because I don't want you to see me cry a lot. Why not? Because that isn't fair to either of us. Yes, it is. I want us to move on. How much do you cry? How much? A spoonful, a cup, a bathtub, if you added it up. It doesn't work like that. Like what? She said, I'm trying to find ways to be happy. Laughing makes me happy. I said, I'm not trying to find ways to be happy, and I won't. She said, well, you should. Why? Because Dad would want you to be happy. Dad would want me to remember him. Why can't you remember him and be happy? Why are you in love with Ron? What? You're obviously in love with him. So what I want to know is why? What's so great about him? Oscar, did it ever occur to you that things might be more complicated than they seem? That occurs to me all the time. Ron is my friend. So then promise me you won't ever fall in love again. Oscar, Ron is going through a lot too. We help each other. We're friends. Promise me you won't fall in love. Why would you ask me to promise that? Either promise me that you'll never fall in love again, or I'm going to stop loving you. You're not being fair. I don't have to be fair. I'm your son. She let out an enormous breath and said, you remind me so much of Dad. And then I said something that I wasn't planning on saying and didn't even want to say. As it came out of my mouth, I was ashamed that it was mixed with any of my dad's cells, and I might have inhaled when we went to visit Ground Zero. If I could have chosen, I would have chosen you. She looked at me for a second, then stood up and walked out of the room. I wish she'd slammed the door, but she didn't. She closed it carefully, like she always did. I could hear that she didn't walk away. Extremely depressed, crossed out, incredibly alone. Mom? Nothing. I got out of bed and went to the door. I take it back. She didn't say anything, but I could hear her breathing. I put my hand on the doorknob because I thought maybe her hand was on the doorknob on the other side. I said I take it back. You can't take back something like that. Can you apologize for something like that? Nothing. Do you accept my apology? I don't know. How can you not know? Oscar, I don't know. Are you mad at me? Nothing. Mom? Yes? Are you still mad at me? No. Are you sure? I was never mad at you. What were you? Hurt. Incredibly alone, crossed out. I guess I fell asleep on the floor. When I woke up, Mom was pulling my shirt off to help me get into my PJs, which means she must have seen all of my bruises. I counted them last night in the mirror, and there were 41. Some of them have gotten big, but most of them are small. I don't put them there for her, but still, I want her to ask me how I got them, even though she probably knows, and to feel sorry for me, because she should realize how hard things are for me, and to feel terrible, because at least some of it is her fault, and to promise me that she won't die and leave me alone, but she didn't say anything. I couldn't even see the look in her eyes when she saw the bruises, because my shirt was over my head, covering my face like a pocket or a skull.